Hi, we're going to talk about labels today and portion sizes. They go hand in hand. I want to pull up the PowerPoint and use that as a little bit of a guide so that we can go over some of the label literacy that you need to know in order to be able to properly pick out foods for you and your family. Okay. So today we're talking about label literacy and portion distortion. Just recently, over the past few years, we've been um, changing, transitioning from what we're affectionately called the old labels to the new labels, or in this example, the original label versus the new label. And they have a lot in common and they have some things just a little different. It's been tweaked a little bit. I think the newer label go in the right direction and should be able to provide most consumers with the information they need to make wise decisions. Because both labels have serving size and the number of servings per container. But if you can see on the newer label, the serving size is bolder and more distinct, so you know what the serving size is. The only set serving size that is regulated by the government is beverages, and that's for 8 ounces. After that, it can be any size the manufacturer decides. With the newer labels, they're encouraging manufacturers to use normal or more traditional serving sizes, as opposed to the older labels. They could put very small amounts. For instance, many granolas, the cereals, the serving size was a fourth of a cup to make it look like there weren't as many calories in it as there are. Now they're having to kind of belly up to the bar and be a little more open or transparent about those kinds of things. So both um, the calories and the serving sizes are bolder in the newer format. Also, sugar's listed in two ways. We naturally find sugars, simple sugars, in foods. For instance, tomatoes have a little fructose in them, and fructose is a simple sugar. And obviously, fruit has fructose. Milk has lactose, which chemically are considered simple sugars. And so on the old labels, they were lumped into sugar the same way that sugar bowl sugar was lumped into it. So in the original labels, you just had one distinction for sugar. And now in the newer labels, you have the total amount of sugar and the added amount of sugar. How much did Betty Crocker or Pillsbury or Sara Lee or whoever it is add into your product? So if you look on a can of tomato sauce or tomato paste, it will tell you it has a few grams of sugar, but it will say 0 added sugar. For me, one of the biggest things is that if Mother Nature put the sugar in, it's probably coming with a lot of other nutrients, and it's probably okay to eat, especially in moderation. But if a manufacturer put the sugar in, you want to think twice about what that means. Let's drill down just a little more. A teaspoon of sugar has 4 grams of sugar in it. So if you had a product that said it had 12 grams of added sugar, that means that the equivalent of 3 teaspoons of sugar had been added to that product. You look at that bowl of cereal, say, and normally you only put 1 teaspoon of sugar on your cereal, and this has 3 added. They're sneaking in 2 extra teaspoons of sugar that you may not choose to have. So in a little later, I'm going to give you an example between traditional Cheerios and Honey Nut Cheerios so you can see a little more about what I'm talking about. But the easiest and the best way to look at it, so if you get pre-sweetened, say, iced tea, and it says there's 12 grams of sugar in it, and remember, a teaspoon has 4 grams, so a teaspoon of sugar is equal to 4 grams. That means there are 3 teaspoons of sugar in that 8 ounces of iced tea. If you made your own iced tea, and if you did add regular sugar, which we all should be cutting down, we all know that, but if you did add sugar, would you add 3 teaspoons? You go to something like the Arizona iced teas or Coke or 7 Up or any kind of soda pop, you can get the equivalent sometimes of 10 teaspoons of sugar in, say, a 12-ounce serving. There is no way that you can put that much sugar in your own drink. And the reason is that they're using modified corn syrup, and that is liquid, so they can add it in. But if you're trying to stir in even 2 teaspoons of sugar in 8 ounces of, say, iced tea, you'd have half of it in the bottom not dissolved. So you got to really watch, and that's one of the things on the label. I want you to start going to this added sugar and dividing it by 4, the number of grams, to tell you how many teaspoons of sugar there. Because to me, that's easier to visualize. Would I put 2.5 teaspoons of sugar in that product for the 2/3 of a cup that they say is a serving? Um, Also, there's something on the side, and most people don't understand what this daily value is. The daily values have been updated to reflect the most current research about how much fat we should be eating and how much cholesterol and how much sodium and those kinds of things. Um, and the daily value tells us whether it's a good source or not so good source of something. The other thing that's been added to the newer label is that they've now defined what the daily value of fiber should be. So they've added that as a daily value. Now you can see that fiber is listed under carbohydrates. Fiber is a carbohydrate, but it's undigestible. We are not able to break it down, assimilate it into our body, and access the calories that are there. But fiber plays a huge role in our health. So it's important to get your daily value of sugar. The vitamins and minerals have been changed, um, and how they're listed has been changed a little bit as well. The old label, they concentrated on vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, and iron. And all they did is tell you the daily value. Well, the daily value is the percent of the recommended daily allowance for a man or a woman between 18 and I think it's 50. And women and men have different needs, so they take the highest. The easiest example I can give you there is that women of childbearing age need 18 milligrams of iron per day, and men only need 8. So when you're looking at this, where it said iron is meeting 45%, that means it's probably giving you 8 grams, which for a man would be 100% of their iron needs. Well, we've changed some of the nutrients because we realize that in modern American eating, there are some key nutrients that we really aren't getting enough of globally, all of us. And so they wanted consumers to be more aware of how much vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. So potassium and vitamin D are the newcomers, and iron and calcium remain for all of us to know more about. So we can actually use that daily value and percent daily value to our advantage in looking at whether a source, the food source, is a good or a poor contributor of that nutrient. Let me back up just a little bit. only processed foods have to have labels. So an apple, an orange, a um, even rice, if it was in a bin and it was brown rice, it was whole rice, wouldn't need to have a label. And most deli products, if they're made on premises, don't have to have labels. So what we're really after as dietitians is to have fewer processed foods. So the goal would be not to read a lot of labels because you're not eating a lot of foods that require a lot of labels. But nonetheless, even I rely on some convenience foods because we're all busy. We don't spend our entire time in the kitchen, even though I love to cook. And I do make my own bread because I love to cook and it kind of calms me down. It's my therapy. But we all would spend, hours in the kitchen and there are much more fun things to do, like play with our grandchildren um, than being cooking all the time. So that being said, when a food has a percent of a daily value that's greater than 20%, it's considered a good source of that nutrient. So you think about it, they're thinking that, for instance, if it was a cereal, that's only a part of your breakfast, or maybe it's a snack, but it's not your entire intake. So you're going to have other food along the way during the day that's going to add to that percentage. So everything doesn't have to meet 100% in one bite, basically, or one bowlful. So 20% or above is considered a good source, and less than 5% is considered a poor source of that nutrient. But the question is that good or bad? Well, it depends on the nutrient, really. So when you're looking at daily value, what you want to look for is there's certain nutrients you want less of. We know that a diet that gives us more than 35% of our calories from fat is not good. It's not healthy. Uh, so we would like to look for foods that are lower in fat. So you don't necessarily want the fat to be a good source of fat on that label. Same thing with saturated fat. Saturated fats are the fats that tend to be the bad guys when you look at total types of fats. There's several different kinds of fats and oils. And in actuality, in the near future, um, in the next few months, we're going to be talking about the family of lipids, which contains fats and oils. Which ones are the good guys? Which ones are the guys that you really want to minimize? I hate to use bad. So saturated fats are a part of the fat family, and they're ones that you want to minimize. Very briefly, so when you're reading a label, you kind of know, saturated fats are fats that are solid at room temperature. So that would be beef fat and butter, even margarine, all contain saturated fats, and they have some negative health implications when eaten in too high of an amount. Trans fats are another fat. Most of the trans fats we want to avoid are man-made trans fats. And again, we'll go into that detail much more in future months. I have to give you something to look forward to here. Cholesterol belongs to that fat or lipid family as well. And we know that high cholesterols in our body can cause harm. Our liver makes cholesterol, but we also eat cholesterol. So we need to keep tabs on what that level in our body is. And the one thing we can modify is how much cholesterol that we eat. And it's usually associated with saturated fat. So they kind of hang out together. We also want less sodium. The more processed a food is, the more likely it is to have a lot of sodium. And usually the more processed the food is, the less potassium it has. So fresh peaches are a pretty good source of potassium, but peach pie is not. So there's two reasons you want to eat minimally processed foods. One is they're going to be higher in potassium, and that's a good thing. And two, it's going to be lower in sodium, and that's also a good thing. And we want to concentrate on that added sugar, not so much the sugar Mother Nature put in our food, but the added sugar that man put in our food in manufacturing. Now, the nutrients on the label that you want more of would be fiber. Most Americans only get about 50% of the fiber that they need. So whenever you can find a food or an equivalent food that is higher in fiber, it puts a big smiley face on my face. And it's good for us. It's good for our overall health. Even though we don't absorb fiber, fiber does a lot of good stuff for us. And then, of course, we want that food to be packed with vitamins and minerals. And we also know that the vitamins and minerals found in food work much better than vitamins and minerals found in pills. Mother Nature's been really kind to us, putting the vitamins and minerals and other nutrients in our foods, the ones that work together, kind of come together naturally in the foods that we eat. So the more vitamins and minerals you can find in your food, as opposed to a bottle, the better off you will be. So all this is great. We got vitamins, we're looking at vitamins, we're looking at minerals, we're looking at fiber, not too much of this, a lot of that. But what's really important is what's in the food. So we really want to look at that. Excuse me, I'm sorry, it stopped sharing for some reason. Let me go back to sharing. Okay, so what a dietitian looks for usually is we read the ingredients right there. Read the ingredients. And the ingredients are listed in the order of weight in that product, the most to least. So the food product, the ingredient that weighs the most is the one listed first. The second most is the next, the third most. So they're in descending order. And this is a package. It happens to be one of those macaroni and cheese little, make it in the microwave in that styrofoam cup, which bothers me to begin with anyway. And you heat it up for 3 minutes and add the powdered cheese, and you can see how many ingredients there are. I don't know about you, but the once a year I do make macaroni and cheese. It's got the macaroni product and it's got milk and a little flour and cheese, and you put it all together, and it's pretty fatty, and it's not something you should be eating very often, if at all. But it doesn't have all this other stuff in it that looks like a chemistry experiment. So I always start with the ingredient list. If the label reads like a chemistry experiment, I pass on it. And if a label reads like a recipe, it's worth reading the rest of the label to see if it's something that you want to eat. I don't care, if it only has 3 calories, but if there are ingredients in that product that I don't want to put in my body, who cares whether it has 3 calories or not? So, oops, we went too fast. So what does a nutrition label tell us? But sometimes it's what it doesn't tell us that's important as well. The ingredients are listed in descending order, but you still don't know the exact amounts. So you don't know if that first ingredient is 80% of the total product, and all these list of the other 20 are 1% each, which is pretty negligible. So you can pretty well guess that if the ingredient is at the very end, it's in a small amount. But again, it's a guess, it's not true. Also, the label doesn't tell us how many mono and polyunsaturated fats there are. And those are the good guys. You can kind of deduce that if the total fat is 10 grams and the saturated fat is 5 grams, then the other 5 grams are divided up between the mono and polyunsaturated fats. So, but you have to know your fat nutrition before you know that. Also, labels can be off by 10% plus or minus on any amount. So they're a good ballpark guess. They're a good starting point, but the best starting point is to start with fresh food whenever possible. So here's some label lingo. And only the government could think of some of these things, let me tell you. So you have to, just like when you read a French book, you need to know French. Yeah, you need to know labelese, I guess it would be called. Healthy. In order for a food to be called healthy, that food has to be low in fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium, and contain at least 10% of one of the following: vitamin D, potassium, iron, calcium, protein, or fiber. That's kind of a lousy definition as far as I'm concerned. Okay, high, 20% or more of the daily value of a given nutrient. So if it says this food's high in vitamin C, it gives us 20% or more of vitamin C. If it said it was high in fiber, it would give us 20% more um, or more of our fiber requirement for the daily value. They can also use rich or excellent source to mean the same thing. Less is it has at least 25% less of whatever nutrient they're saying it's less in, or calories compared to the normal food. I have one example here, and this is refried beans. Let me get in the camera here. And it says it's 30% less. So they even went the extra mile. And even at that, it has 370 milligrams, which means it has almost 500 milligrams if you got the regular canned beans. I have beans here that are just regular dried pinto beans, and there is 0 sodium in those. So there's always choices, folks, always choices. Then a third fewer calories than comparison food would have, or 50% less fat or sodium. So they can define how much less is less. Low, that amount of food, it's an amount of food that would allow frequent consumption without exceeding the daily value for a nutrient. So lettuce, if it had a label, would be low in calories. More, it has at least 10% of a nutrient than a comparison food. So it can also say it's got extra or added. So it's got more calcium. For instance, there's calcium fortified orange juice. So it can say it's got more calcium than regular orange juice because they've added calcium to it, more than 10%. And oranges normally don't come with any calcium at all. So calorie free, it's less than 5 calories a serving. Low calorie, 40 calories or less a serving. Reduced calorie, at least 25% fewer calories than the comparison food. Fat free, less than a half a gram of fat. Low fat, less than 3 grams of fat. So you have to take a dictionary with you for the label reading. Less fat, 25% fewer fat calories than the comparison food. Then trans fat, I've got that in red because we want that to be as low as possible. And here's where government mathematics comes into play. If it's less than 0.5 grams of trans fat, then they can say 0 on the label, but we're only supposed to eat no more. We're not supposed to have any more than 2 milligrams of trans fats a day. Trans fats are more atherogenic, cause more heart disease than cholesterol and saturated fat. So if you ate 4 servings of 0 trans-free, fat-free product, you actually could have eaten 2 grams and thought you'd eaten 0. I think that's a little deceiving. So the only way you can tell if there's trans fats in a food is if in the ingredients that you read first, it said partially hydrogenated something, it's an oil, it would be corn oil, canola oil, olive oil, whatever, or hydrogenated corn, olive, whatever oil it is. There's trans fats in that. And you probably want to put the package back neatly on the shelf and go for something else. High fiber, it's got to have at least 5 grams. Most of us need between 20 and 30 grams of fiber a day. It depends on our age and our sex. You know, men need a little more fiber than women, that kind of thing. And sugar-free, less than a half a gram of sugar. There's more even, and I haven't done, there's pages and pages of these definitions. I've tried to do the ones that seem most relevant to what a normal shopper needs to know about. So sodium-free or salt-free, it can have 5 milligrams of sodium. We need somewhere between 2,000 and, well, the daily value, the recommended amounts are between 2,000 and 2,400 milligrams a day. So 5 milligrams in something really is very much a small drop in that bucket. Low sodium, 140 milligrams or less a serving. Very low sodium, less than 35 milligrams a serving. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to look at some labels for you. We'll go ahead and start with those pinto beans. These are the pinto beans that I have, and they do say that it's 30% less sodium. And if you look on the back of the label, you can read that a half cup serving is 120 calories. There's 2.5 grams of fat. 1 gram of that is saturated fat. They're saying 0 trans fats, but we'll get to the ingredients and see how honest they are with that. Cholesterol is 0. Plant products do not have cholesterol in them unless it's been added. For instance, if you're doing traditional refried beans, you would add lard. Lard is an animal product. It would have cholesterol. It would have saturated fats. The sodium is 370 milligrams. The regular refried beans are about 500 milligrams, and that's for a half cup serving, folks. That's not a lot of refried beans. A half cup has 18 grams of fiber. 6 of those are in the form, 18 grams of carbohydrate. 6 of those are as fiber. So they can say that it is a good source, an excellent source of fiber, because if 1/2 cup provides 21% of the daily value. And remember, anything over 20 is considered a good source. And it's fiber. Fiber is one of those things we want more of, right? Less than 1 gram of sugar added, or sugar in it, and 0 grams of added sugar. No vitamin D, iron's about 6% of the daily value, no calcium, and potassium is about 8% at 330 milligrams. So in this can of beans, there's cooked beans, water less than 2%, and it does have lard. So this trans fats means it is less than 5 milligrams of trans fats. Spices, natural flavor, garlic powder. And it also says it may contain soy. Now, why would it say that? It says that because it's made in a manufacturing plant that probably also manufactures soy products. And they cannot necessarily prevent maybe airborne soy cross-contaminating or whatever. You take the pinto beans, good old-fashioned pinto beans. And if you just take the pinto beans themselves, this is a 4th cup serving, which I'm estimating based on the calories and everything, probably turns out to be about 2/3 of a cup, because you'll see that they more than double, but not, they don't, I mean, they don't more than double, but they increase obviously with cooking because they absorb water. Anyway, it says 0.5 grams of fat. The canned beans had 2.5. Obviously, there's no trans fats, there's no saturated fat. Cholesterol, nothing, but neither did our canned. Sodium, 5 milligrams compared to 370 in the reduced sodium. Total carbohydrate is 30, which is more than the cans, but 7 grams of fiber compared to 6. Total sugar is 1, but 0 added. And protein is 10 grams. The can is 6 grams. That's unadulterated, you know. But if you cook your own beans, and they're really not that hard to do, they don't take a lot. They take a lot of time, but they don't take a lot of effort time. When you're cooking them, you can add onion, you can add garlic, you can add cilantro. I usually chop up some jalapeno in there for flavor. And so you can flavor up your beans without adding sodium, without adding any fat. And you can have an enjoyable, high fiber, low fat, decent source of protein, and it can be very enjoyable. So if you can't do that, the next best thing to do is to get canned cooked pinto beans. And if you get the reduced sodium, they're going to have less sodium. You can rinse those beans off to get rid of even some more sodium. And then you can add your own flavoring agents like garlic and onion and those kinds of things, and have a real tasty side dish or center of the plate, because beans make a good substitute for meat as well. My next example of reading things, I've got 2 more examples, are Cheerios, regular and honey nut. The first thing that struck me is both of them, the calories say 140 calories. It's 140 calories for a cup and a half of Cheerios, and it's 140 calories for 1 cup of honey nut. So, oops, volume wise, I don't know about you guys, I put enough strawberries or blueberries on my cereal. I don't need sugar. I've got Mother Nature's sugar, but I'm getting all the good nutrients from those low glycemic fruits as well. Okay, along with that, the things that really struck me is, they have about the same amount of fat per serving, but remember the Cheerios, the regular old-fashioned Cheerios it's more volume. And you wouldn't expect a grain product to have a lot of fat. Neither of them have cholesterol. The sodium in the traditional Cheerios is 190 milligrams, and in the honey nut is 212. More Cheerios, less sodium in the regular old-fashioned. Carbohydrates are basically the same, but the fiber, there's more fiber in the traditional than in the honey nut. And the sugar, the added sugar in the traditional Cheerios is 2 grams, and the added sugar in the honey nut is 12 grams. That's 3 teaspoons of sugar, folks. Vitamins and minerals are pretty much the same. So even within brands, and most of us saying, "Oh, Cheerios are Cheerios." Well, they're not. Cheerios are not Cheerios. There's honey nut Cheerios and there's regular Cheerios. So you'd want to know what you're doing. Okay, the last thing, because this is one of the things I use convenience wise a lot, is pasta sauce. Except I have a big garden, so except when my tomatoes are coming in and I've got too many tomatoes to use, and then I make homemade pasta sauce. But usually you can find like products but different nutritional values. And one of the biggest problems with canned or jarred anything is usually the higher in sodium. So this particular marinara sauce is got 500 milligrams of sodium for a half cup portion. Well, when I make spaghetti, I'm not eating a half cup of this, I can guarantee you. So that turns out to be a lot of sodium. Normally, what I tell people to do is try to keep their, and we're going to talk more about sodium, but if we're only supposed to have about 2,000 to 2,400 milligrams a day, let's make the math easy and make it 2,100 milligrams. And that's 700 milligrams of sodium, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you do want it spread out. So you could only have a half a cup of this. The pasta that you would eat with it wouldn't have any if you didn't salt the water. And then you could have a vegetable plain or with a little olive oil maybe, but none of the rest of the meal could have any sodium is the point. This same store brand marinara sauce is no added salt, and it does say it's not a sodium-free food. This particular jar has 45 milligrams. Remember, it has to have less than 5 milligrams to say it's sodium-free, but there's no sodium added. So this would be a choice that you can use. And, I've used it, and what I find when I do use it, I add extra basil and extra garlic to give it a flavor punch. Because one of the things salt does besides preserving our food is it does enhance flavors. But there's other things we can use, and we'll be talking about those in future months as well for the little bit of a tease there. So there's just some ways that you can look. The other thing is we'll go ahead. I want to go ahead and read these labels a little more, and they'll tell you what. It says it's low fat. The 500 milligrams of sodium is low fat one. It also says that it's a good source of potassium. And the reason it can say that is that it contains 10% of the potassium that we need in a month. It doesn't say it's excellent. It says it's good. And on this one, the potassium's 500 milligrams. This was 480. So it also is a good source of potassium. Doesn't necessarily say that on the label. And if you read both of these labels, you get a recipe. You don't get a chemistry experiment. Organic tomato puree, organic diced tomatoes, tomato juice, citric acid, which is vitamin C, organic sugar, so they add a little sugar to it, garlic, onions, olive oil, black pepper, basil, oregano, all the things that you put in a marinara sauce are there, and you don't get any funky words that you can't understand. But only a chemist would understand, and that's what we're really, really, really looking for. Okay. So portions, wow. This is one, I have clients come to my office and say, I don't get it. Why can't I lose weight? I'm eating all the right things, or I don't get it. I can't get my blood sugar under control, and I'm really eating, they'll use the word clean or healthy. And when I ask them what they eat in a day, they're eating great foods in the wrong amount, in the wrong portion size, and in the wrong ratio. So just like your car, went to a mechanic and said there's something wrong with this stupid car, it doesn't run well. And he questioned you further and found out that you'd put 16 gallons of oil in it and 2 quarts of gas. Right stuff, wrong ratio. Same thing with portion sizes. You've got to be aware of the volume that you're eating as well. So here are some dietitian portion sizes. Now, this doesn't mean this is all you eat in a day, but when we're talking fruits, dietitians usually say it's one small piece or a half a cup. The exception to that is it's usually a cup of berries because they are much lower in fructose or natural sugar. So, and these are just general guidelines. Any starch, whether it be pasta or rice, anything, or even starchy vegetables like corn or lima beans, it would be half a cup. Or if it's a bread type product, one slice is pretty simplistic. You'd want it to have about 15 grams of carbohydrate, and it would be what a dietitian would consider an appropriate portion for that particular food. Protein, usually we talk about 3 ounces of meat in a meal, and it's 1 ounce of meat would be the 3 ounces would be the portion, but the same amount of is added for like a half a cup of meat, canned meats, tuna and salmon. That's only 1 ounce, so you'd have 3/4 of a cup of tuna fish to give you the 3 ounce meal portion, or a fourth of a cup of nuts, and they're pretty high in healthy fat, so you don't want to go too much above, is equal to about an ounce of meat. Or cottage cheese, a fourth of a cup of cottage cheese is equal to the same amount, 1 ounce of meat. So normally the portions of meat, that's a little confusing because normally we have you eat 3 ounces of meat at lunch and 3 ounces of meat at dinner. You don't need more than 6 ounces a day. It can be spread out. So one egg is equal to an ounce of chicken or beef. So if you had an egg in the morning and you had tuna, half a cup of tuna, that would be, the egg would be 1 ounce, the half a cup of tuna would be 2. There's your 3 ounces. And then you could have 3 ounces of, say, salmon or chicken at dinner, and you'd get your 6 ounces for the day. Those are real general guidelines. A lot of it depends on your age, your weight, your nutritional needs. Those are just the general. Vegetables, a half cup cooked is considered a portion, and 1 cup raw is considered a portion. Fats and oils, it's a teaspoon of butter or margarine or oil, 2 tablespoons of most salad dressings or sour cream, an eighth of an avocado. Here's the kicker: the difference between a portion and a serving size. When I tell somebody they should include, say, 6 vegetables a day in their diet, I don't mean they should necessarily eat 6 different vegetables in a day. What I mean is, I'm going to go back here, is if they had a cup of broccoli for dinner, that's 2 of those 6. That's 1 serving, but 2 portions of vegetables, dietitian portions, if you want to call it that. And then if they had, say, if they had a salad at lunch that was 4 cups of raw vegetables, because if you had a lunch salad, 4 cups wouldn't be all that big even. I mean, it would be a decent size. So you've had 2 portions of broccoli at a cup for dinner, and 4 cups of raw vegetables at lunch in the form of a salad. There's your 6 portions of vegetables for the day in really 2 servings. So that's a tricky one. So, and it doesn't have to be 6 different things. Normally I tell people they shouldn't eat more than 2 pieces of fruit a day. Fruit's got wonderful amount of vitamins and minerals in it, but it also does contain a higher amount of natural Mother Nature sugar. So you don't want to go overboard. Ways to keep portions in check is that a visual way is usually on a plate, a quarter of the plate. If you keep that to the protein size, that's about 3 ounces, unless you have a super duper super sized plate, of course. A fourth of a cup of the plate as starch, rice or pasta, potato, that equals about a half a cup as well. And then half the plate in vegetables, piled in vegetables, we say. Vegetables are Mother Nature's vitamin pills. And Mother Nature provides the vitamins in the best to be absorbed way, and also with complementary nutrients that enhance each other. The vitamin pill doesn't. Other things you can do is use smaller plates. You put a half a cup of brown rice on a huge plate, and it looks like somebody's trying to starve you to death. You use a smaller plate, and where the food looks like it fills the plate, just psychologically, it's a better look. And use the same bowls and plates whenever possible, because what I usually tell people to do is just every once in a while, measure your food. Instead of taking the rice out with a serving spoon, take a half a cup and put it on that plate so you can see what it looks like. So if you're using the same bowls and plates, you visually can estimate your portion sizes a lot better. So always have homework. I'm a teacher. That's what we do. What I want you to do is start reading labels. And I want you to measure your portions for at least 3 meals a week. Just kind of double check yourself instead of, just putting a pile of green beans on your plate. Put it in a measuring cup. See how much you're really eating. We really encourage people to eat a lot more vegetables. If you're going to overeat anything, do it in the vegetable category. So just get an idea about what your portions are versus your serving sizes. As always going to finish up with Libby's nutrition philosophy. You should be trying to read a rainbow every day, lots of color. Lots of color means lots of fruits and vegetables, or what really I usually say is a lot more vegetables and some more fruit. The colors in your food even have health promoting properties. They're called phytonutrients, and they have wonderful properties to help maintain our health. Don't mess with Mother Nature. I mean, eat foods, again, this is the next few really. Um, Mother Nature's done a great job with food. You don't need to add purple dye to it or lots of sugar or lots of salt. It doesn't make it better. Only eat foods found on this earth when your grandmother was alive. My grandmother was born in the late 1800s. They did not have Pringles, and they did not have Rice-A-Roni. And they didn't have Cheetos. Um, what else didn't we have? So, or at least pre-World War II. It was after World War II that we started developing a lot of canned soups and a lot of frozen TV dinners and a lot of food that my grandmother would not have recognized at all. So you want it to be food your grandmother would have recognized. Eat foods as close to the farm as possible. 2 ways to interpret that. The average food comes 1,500 miles to our grocery store. I'm not sure why we eat Florida grapefruit and Florida eats California grapefruit. Doesn't make sense to me. So that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is, if you're going to eat an apple, eat a whole apple. A whole apple is more nutritious and better for you than applesauce, especially applesauce with sugar added. And then applesauce is better for you than apple juice. So as close to the farm as Mother Nature made it, or the ranch, or the field, however you want to describe it. Spice and herb up your life. Spices and herbs add lots of flavoring. Some of them are antioxidants, some of them are anti-inflammatory agents as well. But more than anything, they allow you to have flavors that are just absolutely wonderful, and you don't have to rely so much on sodium or salt. Eat a plant-forward diet. Really challenge you guys to fill up. If you notice that plate, 3/4 of it with the starch and the vegetables, was plant sources. We don't need to eat the whole left side of a cow. We don't need that much protein. Most of us eat more protein than we do need. What we need are more nutrients, and the nutrients that we need are found from plant sources. Maybe challenge yourself to have one or two meatless meals in a week, or explore some different recipes that use less meat and more vegetables. I always like to follow the Goldilocks nutrition principle. Too much or too little of anything isn't so good. If we don't have enough water, we can die of dehydration. If we drink too much water, we can die of overhydration. If we don't have enough calcium, that affects our bone health. If we have too much calcium, it affects a lot of other organs, because the calcium, it gets deposited in those organs that aren't supposed to have the calcium. So too much or too little of anything isn't good. And that's the Goldilocks nutrition principle. And ask what the food can do for you, not what the food does to you. For instance, when you're eating blueberries, you know that that food is providing you with antioxidants and all kinds of good stuff. Or strawberries, or when you're eating brown rice, you know you're getting more fiber than the white rice. When you're eating chocolate cake or ding dongs, we know that it's just a bunch of sugar that is not making our body work well. So it's doing something to us, not for us. So look, the way I explained it to my students is, you want foods that are full suitcases. You want foods that bring with them lots of vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients. Those are the colors in foods. An empty suitcase would be something like a piece of cake or Pringles, where it brings calories and not much else for you, especially not much else is very good. So those are my little nutrition philosophies. You might want to look at those and try to remember them. So Dr. Maria is holding a healthy recipe contest every month, and the winner will receive a $50 gift card. And you submit your healthy recipe, and I'll look at them, and we'll pick the healthiest recipe to mgreenwald760@gmail.com. Again, that's mgreenwald760@gmail.com. So everybody asks, well, what do you eat? So here we go. These are some of the principles we talked about today, not label reading because there's no labels involved. Maybe that's a lot of the principle that we're reading. So one of my husband's and my favorite dinner is fresh veggies and pasta. So I take an onion and dice it. I slice the zucchini and yellow squash, mushrooms, 8 ounces or more, depending on what I have, at least 6 tomatoes, and just chop those up or dice those up. Garlic, one of my favorite flavorings, a cup of fresh chopped spinach, and a cup of fresh basil. And you saute the onion and garlic in about a tablespoon of olive oil. And when the onions tender, you add the zucchini, yellow squash, mushrooms, and tomatoes. I made this recipe up, so these amounts, it's more like what I have in the refrigerator. And allow that to simmer for at least 30 minutes, or until the tomatoes kind of make a tomato sauce, and the zucchini and mushrooms and yellow squash are tender. And just before serving, I stir in the spinach and the basil, because they don't take a lot to cook. And notice, no salt shaker. And you can serve that over spaghetti squash, zucchini noodles, whole wheat pasta. You just have to watch the serving size of the whole wheat pasta. I usually serve it in a bowl, because I do like the pastas, but I try to minimize the size. So I put a lot of sauce on it. And if you did it on a plate, it would like run all over the place. So I do put mine in a bowl, because I add the spaghetti noodles more like a condiment, and top with a small amount of Parmesan cheese. Smart Parmesan cheese has a lot of sodium, but there was no sodium in the fresh vegetables. I didn't add any sodium. So allowing that little bit of Parmesan cheese makes you feel like you're really indulging a little bit. So next month, which is April, we will be talking about carbohydrate, not so all carbs are not created equal. Which ones we want to eat far less of, and which ones we should be looking at because they do for us in our body. They provide lots of good nutrition. So both sessions will also be taped. The first one is April 12th at 4 p.m. and the second one will repeat at on April 26th at 4 p.m. So I'll actually be streaming live from Alabama then. And so it'll be 6 o'clock my time, 4 o'clock your time. But on April 12th and April 26th, we're going to delve into what carbohydrate is, the myths behind carbohydrate, um, and how you can use carbohydrates to your advantage instead of how most of us use them as to our disadvantage. I hope you've enjoyed this, and we'll see you next month.